Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It was not long after that Donald Trump's home was raided by the FBI because he was illegally stashing hundreds of classified documents there, refusing to give them back, that President Joe Biden's team did a check of his own residences and found some of his own. While packing up his office at the Penn Biden Center, the president's lawyers discovered classified documents from the Obama administration, turned them over to the National Archives. The lawyers later found more documents at Biden's home in Delaware, the vast majority of them actually notes that Biden himself made. But with special counsel Jack Smith already investigating Donald Trump, Attorney General Merrick Garland, rightly, I think, appointed a special counsel to investigate the Biden matter as well. Yesterday, that special counsel, a man named Robert Hur, did his best James Comey impression. He cleared the president of wrongdoing conclusively, saying in the very first sentence of his report that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. But he went on to essentially give the president a political roughing up in a report that drips with contempt and condescension. I mean, really, you should look at the first page of this thing. Within the first few paragraphs, he paints President Biden as some sort of self-obsessed egotist for wanting to preserve documents from his life and career. I'm quoting him here. Mr. Biden has long seen himself as a historic figure. He believed his record during decades in the Senate made him worthy of the presidency. He collected papers and artifacts related to significant issues and events in his career. He used these materials to document his legacy and to cite as evidence that he was a man of presidential timber. What the hell, man? And of course, there was this stinging assessment. Again, this actually isn't an assessment. I want to be clear here. This is a hypothetical of how he thinks Biden would defend himself at trial. He says this: at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Now, again, let's be clear about where this is coming from. Robert Hur is a conservative Republican, former clerk for then Chief Justice William Rehnquist, served in the Department of Justice under Donald Trump, working as a top advisor to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Trump then nominated him to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. And I think the reason that Hur's report struck a nerve with so many people yesterday is that it reminded them of the incalculable damage that FBI Director James Comey did back in 2016. Comey also cleared Hillary Clinton of any wrongdoing related to her handling of classified information. But, like her, he went on to share all sorts of thoughts about the Democratic presidential nominee's bad behavior with her emails. All this got me thinking about an interesting trend in our modern politics about who investigates a sitting president or presidential candidate. So 30 years ago in 1994, Kenneth Starr was appointed as independent counsel overseeing the Whitewater investigation into President Bill Clinton. Of course, Starr was a virulently partisan Republican, as his own report revealed. In fact, you may remember Starr actually returned to the political stage after a huge scandal over sexual abuse and assault at a school that he ran, to the political stage to defend Donald Trump during his first impeachment trial. So that was during Clinton. You got a Republican investigating the Democrat. Then there was George W. Bush. And there was an investigation of the public leaking of a CIA agent's identity to get back at a whistleblower who was saying that the Bush administration was lying about WMD. So the Republican president's deputy attorney general at the time, remember this guy, James Comey, chose another Bush appointee, another guy appointed by a Republican, U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, to serve as special counsel in that case. By 2015, Republican James Comey was the FBI director. He launched a criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Then came Donald Trump and the investigation into his campaign's dealing with Russia. Rod Rosenstein appointed Robert Mueller as special counsel. Remember that? A lifelong Republican who served in several Republican administrations, including in the Bush years. That brings us back to Republican Robert Hur. You seeing a pattern?
Starr, a Reagan Republican, is a former federal appeals judge and served as George Bush's Solicitor General.
Comey and Fitzgerald are both Bush political appointees and carry the same baggage as John Ashcroft, said Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts.
Both Robert Mueller and James Comey are lifelong Republicans. Both were high-level George W. Bush appointees.
Rob Hur is a registered Republican who served in the top ranks of President Trump's Justice Department.
So there's a clear pattern here. It's consistent, at least. Democrats get investigated by Republicans, while Republicans get investigated by Republicans. Now, we're also seeing what happens when Republicans judge Republicans. The news of the closing of Biden's classified documents case may have reminded you, as it did me, oh, right, there is still an ongoing criminal case against Donald Trump for his handling of classified documents at his retirement home in Florida. Trump faces a total of 40 felony charges in that case, including willful retention of national defense information in violation of the Espionage Act. And in fact, Special Counsel Hur was at lengths to point out the vast difference between the Biden case and this one. But that case, the criminal one pending against the guy who's going to be the Republican nominee, has kind of disappeared off the radar, in large part because who is in charge of it? District Judge Aileen Cannon, also conservative, member of the Federalist Society, appointed by Donald Trump himself. And back in 2022, Judge Cannon burst on the scene with a frankly ludicrous ruling in Trump's favor right after the FBI searched Mar-a-Lago, a decision so flagrantly wrong that the federal appeals court above her, a panel of 3 Republican nominees, unanimously reversed it in a scathing ruling. But that embarrassment has not seemed to affect Judge Cannon at all. Since she was assigned to the case last summer, Cannon has not made any effort to seem like a more fair-minded arbiter of justice. Aileen Cannon knows that Donald Trump wants to delay his trial in this matter until after the election. And she can make that happen if she wishes. I mean, judges can move cases as swiftly or as slowly as they like, to be honest. Over and over again, Judge Cannon has ruled against the government as they try to keep the case moving towards trial. Just today, she ordered Special Counsel Jack Smith's team to hand over documents to Trump's lawyers that include the names of dozens of people who participated in the investigation. And here's the thing. The reason they don't want to hand them over to Trump's lawyers, Smith's office says, is because the documents also describe threats made to prospective witnesses. She told them they got to hand them over anyway. This is the dilemma we face in the era of Donald Trump as he forces a huge, constant, daily test of our entire judicial system and rule of law. Right? Trump wants it both ways. He claims all efforts to bring him to justice are a partisan attack. There's no such thing as neutral justice or equal justice. But that's aspirational. He wants to use the justice system and his supporters within it for his own partisan aims. In the case of Aileen Cannon, it looks like what it looks like when Donald Trump gets his way.